Finally, we have a speaker, Edena. Yeah, nice to meet you again. Yeah, okay. In fact, okay, let me first introduce her first. Edena is the former VP of the supply chain governance, risk management, compliance, and sustainability of the Mattel Asia Pacific Sourcing Limited. Edena was responsible to ensure company operate a world-class supply chain focusing on people and the environment. As the Mattel with the responsible supply chain standard and a comprehensive oversight system, Edena advocate her employee to enjoy a healthy and safe working environment. But I know that you have just left the Mattel very recently.
Very recently,
Yeah.
in the last couple of weeks.
Oh, okay, it's fine. I believe you have worked in Mattel for more than 10 years. Your experience is valuable to us kids. Yeah,
Thanks.
then I do not have the PowerPoint, but you need to listen to her presentation.
Well, hopefully, I'm engaging enough for people to listen to me. I am the last person standing between you and happy hour, so okay. So as Felix, well, first of all, thank you, Felix. I think I haven't seen you for 7 months since the last event. But what a difference 7 months makes with protests, with COVID. I think it is more important at this time more than any other, I think, in recent history to consider sustainability as a real integral part of business and not as a nice to have. And it's been a fascinating day listening to the other speakers. Oh, sure. And I think, I wanted to break down a little bit of what my experience has been leading Mattel and its global sustainability program, maybe as a way to tie up the day and summarize, maybe as a case study, what we've gone through as a company and what we might be looking forward to in the future. So I think, as I've said, the first thing is defining sustainability, and what I think somebody has shared. People talk about ESG all the time, and is that sort of how companies should start to look at sustainability across the corporation. Many of us think as sustainability going into it for the very first time, oh, is it just about the climate? But actually it isn't. And I think a good way to ask question is, what are you trying to solve for as a corporation, and why? Our experience at Mattel is we started with the S. We are the toy industry is extremely labor intensive, and having to deal with a lot of people in the supply chain, there's a need to actually address what we do with the people in our supply chain. That's why, Felix, you talked about health and safety. That was actually the bedrock of our sustainability program. And how do we create that healthy and safe environment for the people that come and make toys for kids around the world? Then I think we transitioned from that and continued our progress in that area. But really, the turning point was in 2011. If some of you remember when Greenpeace sailed down our corporate headquarters in LA, it sort of put us in the spotlight. And although we weren't the ones sort of doing wrong, if you will, purchasing from suppliers who are seen to be doing wrong is also something to think about. And that had caused us at that time to come up very quickly with the sustainable sourcing principles, which we've been very proud to continue to operate against, and have been sort of hitting our goals against that. Essentially the principles under the SSP just tell us to ensure that there's a chain of custody that is well mapped out. We understand who we're buying from, where the source of the fiber is coming from. Then I think the second question to ask is always, as you get into big and bolder with sustainability, is what is of material impact. For us, we did what we call a materiality assessment, where we polled internal and external stakeholders, understanding the business that we're in and where we can make the most impact. And a lot of that starts from, and I think a lot of the speakers again have used the SDGs as a starting point, and what we can impact against the SDGs. The other area which we also had to look at is regulation. There's a lot of regulation, especially in the European context, leading the way around what you do from a social standpoint, from things like modern slavery to disclosures of human rights abuses to materials that we use in products, etc. So the materiality assessment is a great way, or part of a good methodology, to get to a defensible approach to sustainability. And we in my tenure, we did update that once, because I think the recommendation is we should look at it at every 5 years or so. At Mattel, or within the toy industry, as I talked about, I think the important thing with materiality was people starting first. And so having started with a code of conduct quite some years ago, evolving that, being an active part of the Global Ethical Toy Program, and I'm still chair of that program, and we continue to drive towards improvements in toy factory conditions, and looking for ways where we can scale even beyond the toy industry to positively impact manufacturing as a whole. From an environmental perspective, I think looking at the toy industry, I think that there were 3 things that we felt were important. One, operations. We do run our own factories, and so given our internal and external supply chain footprint, we thought it was important to focus on things like emissions, waste, electricity. Not so much water, because our processes don't use as much water. And then from a packaging and products perspective, which are the other 2 pillars, beyond sustainably sourcing paper and wood fiber, to now, very recently, in 2019, we did announce our goal to achieve 100% recyclable or bio-based plastics materials in toys. This was an update of my last conversation with you, Felix, where we were not ready to announce it yet, but we have since, in the last 7 months or so, created a lot more external facing communications about our efforts in this area. And we have launched, I think some of you might be familiar with the Fisher-Price Rock-A-Stack. That is something that has a new line of Braskem made materials. And then for those who are more familiar with Lego, we actually have Mega, and that there's a forestry line of building blocks for kids that actually uses bio-based materials as well. Bio-based is, I think some of you will know, it's not the full answer, but I think it is a step in the right direction in terms of just making sure we're working with suppliers to try different materials in our products. The third thing I'll say is, and I think Felix, you've asked a question of a lot of people today, is how do you lead, right? I think leadership does set the tone and the challenge. When I was asked to lead our efforts in terms of getting bigger and bolder, the question to ask is, what does 2030 look like? What does 2040 look like? It's always challenging for businesses that have very short leadership tenures. But it does take a special type of leader to ask those questions or be brave enough to take a longer term view of things as opposed to short term views, which a lot of listed companies do have to do because they're bound by quarterly financial results. But I think one easier way to do it is maybe to dip toes in water by setting short term goals. And I think that's always good because through short-term goals, there is always the opportunity for celebration, which is very important. And then I think there are a lot of wise people who've said, if you can't measure something, it's not worth doing. So tracking, measurement, reporting is very, very important. Through my group, we had created a discipline of sharing metrics very regularly, using the data that we get. So on the people side, we do a lot of audits. How do we use that data to share and have really good discussions around with leadership around remediation, continuous improvement, etc. Similarly, on the environmental side, there's also that need to share that metrics very regularly, and we do share that with the board as well. And then reporting externally, right? I think there are some stock exchanges and there are some regulations out there that require reporting, but it's not a must in all jurisdictions. But I do think that it is important to tell that story and to tell that story through data. So having a way to report that, whether through a GRI or similar format, understanding what your stakeholders want. One of the things I had to do in my job was actually talk to investors. They always want to know. And to make it easy for stakeholders on the outside, it's always good to keep to a template, be able to use that template very regularly so that they can see the progress over time. And then telling that story authentically. So no greenwashing. So how do you communicate in a way that how do you let people on the outside know that you're not doing things just for the sake of PR, right? I think that's very important. Acknowledging the challenges. It is not always good news every single day. There are always going to be operational challenges that we face, whether it's through product safety, design, or durability issues, consumer pricing issues. There are always things that are going to impact your progress in sustainability. But I think what is important is showing that authentic effort. I talked about celebrating. I think that's a key part of imbibing a great culture around sustainability, ensuring that you have opportunities to reward, at the same time holding people accountable. So one of the things we didn't get to, but we were in the midst of trying to do is, how do you make sustainability as part of employee goals? We set goals, we reward people, bonuses, etc., based on what they achieve in the business. Having sustainability as part of those goals are going to be very, very important. In the run up to that, embedding that piece in the employee reward system, I think empowering people and not titles is also very important. When we did bigger and bolder at Mattel, one of the first things we did was create a cross leadership sustainability council. So this was made up about 50 people globally across the globe. So it's not just people in design, but it's development, it's lawyers, it's finance people, but making sure everybody has a role to play, and empowering people, not just at the senior levels. If somebody at a middle management or lower management had expertise, they were empowered to lead working groups in a way that gave them opportunities to share their expertise across the company. The other thing that we liked was leveraging the thought leaders. There were certain brands. Mattel is a big portfolio of brands, but one of the brands I talked about, Mega, they were living sustainability as part of their culture. So how did we, take them as a showcase for the rest of the corporation to follow? And then last but not least, collaboration. I think one of the challenges or restrictions was capacity with alternative materials. If the toy industry could collaborate and bring like-minded corporations together, bring competitors together, it would make sustainable materials a lot more accessible and more cost effective for the consumer. And that creates, a bigger pool of material that people can get access to. And so creating that shared value across the toy supply chain is going to be very, very key and is a big part of collaboration. So those are the 7 things that I wanted to share, and hopefully it is helpful to people that are starting to think about how to get into sustainability in a big and bold way in their business. So thanks, Felix, for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you, Edena. In fact, we are running out of time, and you have tried to answer my typical question.
I did.
Yeah, thank you. But I think one last question is, I think it's typically about your background. I know that you are studying law at the University of London. Yeah, and then now you are taking up the sustainability position. This is very simple. Do you think that nowadays any organization, if they just operate, follow the law within the law, can they survive? They have to go to put more resources on sustainability.
I think regulation is a starting point. I think as to run a viable business, and that's why I've gotten to sustainability, is you've got to think of, will my business be around in the next 100 years? And what would it take for my business to be around in 100 years? And very often the answer is beyond compliance. It is not just the law that will get you there.
Okay, yeah, you are in a law background. That your answer should be no trust. Okay, thank you, Edena.
Thank you so much, Felix.
Thank you for all the audience.